Which players belong on the Florida Panthers Mount Rushmore? We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, July 31st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back with you guys to once again celebrate the Summer of Champions that is the Florida Panthers here on the show. Once again, programming note for you guys here from now until mid-September, we are going to be bringing you guys shows 3 times a week. The hope is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but no guarantees as things change with scheduling and everything outside of that. But we have a lot to get into today for the show. We're going to discuss Reinhardt's day with the Cup. We're going to talk about whose seat is the hottest coming into the 2024-2025 season, and who is on the Florida Panthers Mount Rushmore. And here to discuss all of that with me today on this edition of the show is Jacob Winans, and for another edition of Winans Wednesday. Jacob, welcome back to the show on another off-season edition of the show.
Thanks for having me. The Summer of Champions continues. Having a blast.
Yeah, having a blast myself too. Talking about a winning franchise as we are a little bit past the MLB trade deadline, just 13 minutes actually after the fact of this recording. Obviously, this will be posted at midnight here on the show. But hey, grateful to be talking about a winning team. Congrats to your Yankees, by the way, on getting my boy Jazz Chisholm Jr. But let's talk about the Reinhardt's day with the Cup and everything. And also a Florida Panther got married this week. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But Sam Reinhart gets his day with the Cup in British Columbia, celebrates it mostly with his core family members of his mom, dad, 2 brothers, and his wife. Went to Hollyburn Country Club where he learned how to skate with a celebration of over 500 people, and even mentioning a big influence in his life of a person who's still there at that very same country club by the name of Jack Cummings, original hockey director there in West Vancouver, and also had a chance for him to bring it to Capilano Golf Club, Golf and Country Club in British Columbia. Who Sam Reinhart is not a guy who talks a lot too. He's a very reserved guy too, and very low key of a guy who just wants a little bit of a celebration back to his old roots and going back to the people who taught him the game, as well as golfing, something that an activity that he also likes to do in South Florida. So when you look at Sam Reinhart's day with the Cup, what comes to mind for you, my friend?
Yeah, well, I love that he went golfing. It's nice when you get to golf after winning, and it's not an early tee time in the summer for an early playoff exit. So golfing after winning the Cup is always a flex. But where that's concerned, I thought it was really cool. Reinhardt's a very low key, laid back, like you said, reserved, soft spoken guy. Didn't expect him to do anything huge or grand with it. But seeing him just get to share that with his family, his brothers especially, that's a hockey family there. They're all players themselves, and getting to share that with them is really cool. Because it's one of those things like Paul Maurice said. When you look at all the names on that cup, he was able to put Maurice on the cup, and for Sam Reinhart to add the Reinhardt name onto that cup's got to mean a lot for him and for his family. So that was really cool. And I tend to always like the stories where you share it with your family, share it with your hometown. I thought it was really cool to see him go back to his roots, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and Griffin being drafted in the NHL before retiring. His dad, Paul, was a defenseman, played in the 80s too. I actually looked at the temperature right now for West Vancouver, 67 degrees Fahrenheit right now versus what we're
Gorgeous.
experiencing in Florida. The West Vancouver summer sounds pretty awesome, and after winning
I
a cup,
wish.
that is a perfect just perfect temperature to golf there for him. So congratulations to him, and also the 500 people that he celebrated with there too. So big ups for him, and also spoke about his experience about new situation and manifesting that. And also when we talk about even prior to his contract extension, about just the situation that he was in versus what he wasn't, versus making big money and going somewhere else and possibly losing again. So all the indications were that he was always going to sign long term with the Florida Panthers. But speaking of another Florida Panthers in celebration, we have another Panther who was celebrating in a different way, got a ring of his own. Carter Verhaeghe, him and his wife Casey got married this weekend, and congratulations to him. Obviously, this summer is about hockey players getting married, and their availability opens up too. And also, as the clock struck midnight too on the day of the wedding, Evan Rodrigues had a birthday there too, and he was in the middle of the celebration, a recording of him singing a Nicki Minaj song too, ringing in his birthday coming into this year. So another really cool celebration for the Summer of Champions.
Yeah, so talk about a long-term deal with Sam Reinhart. Carter Verhaeghe just got the longest-term deal with his wife Casey, the lifetime deal. So super cool for them. Love seeing the players rally behind him and celebrate with him. Evan Rodrigues is such a personality. He's really, during the playoffs and afterwards, he kind of just really grew on everybody off the ice as a personality, and just the love he's got for his kids. Like if you were at the parade, he was running around with his kids, having his kids high five all the fans and stuff. It's he's become a fan favorite really quickly. But I don't know if you saw it. My favorite part of the Carter Verhaeghe wedding was he and his wife Casey. They came out and danced to "Turn My Swag On," which that's super fitting. And I thought that was really cool. The Swaggy nickname is not going anywhere. That's going to follow him the rest of his career. And for him to embrace that and share a little bit of the Panthers fanhood at his wedding, I thought that was really, really cool. And the dance moves weren't too bad either. I'll give him some credit. He knew what he was doing out there.
Yeah, and not all, and when you get married, I mean, when you think about it, it's a two becomes one. And one of the signage that was there in the wedding were the Swaggies too. So
Yep.
it was a part of including her as part of that mix too, for their wedding. But congratulations to Carter Verhaeghe on that too, on an incredible accomplishment in life. Now has his second Stanley Cup. And speaking of Stanley Cup, it's making its way overseas now. It's already there. Philip Pritchard, the keeper of the cup, took a picture of his passport with a stamp of Munich in Germany. So a stop there first, right before it makes its way to Alexander Barkov. So the Florida Panthers did tweet that the Barkov celebration with him with the Stanley Cup is actually going to be live streamed. It's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern time for according to the Florida Panthers X page too. So the fact that Barkov also wants to share this online with, even though he's thousands of miles away, it really does speak class of this individual.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Barkov's a guy who has so much pride in his hometown and just the fan base there in Finland, and it's really cool having that connection and being able to share that with the Panthers fans here, and also it's just another way of kind of bridging the two. We've seen his hometown there in Finland become almost like a sort of like a pipeline system, almost a minor league system at some points with the Panthers, where we've gotten players to go to and from Finland. You think Barkov, Lundell, Lustrainen, Henrik Borgstrom in the past, Henrik Haapala, Anton Levchi, Alexi Heponiemi. Not all those guys panned out, but these were all Finnish guys that Barkov kind of took under his wing. allowed them to grow and help develop them both in Finland while they were playing there on their way to the pros. But then also once they got to Florida and Barkov really mentored them and helped them along. So I think just Barkov taking that kind of pride in where he's from, sharing that with Panthers fans, and then having that connection heading into next year where the Panthers will play a back-to-back against Dallas there in Tampere, Finland. I think that's really cool. And yeah, you almost run out of great things to say about Barkov. He's the perfect example of a great captain, great person. He continues to show how much he cares about the Panthers fans and his fan base there at home in Finland. He can do no wrong, and it seems everything he does is just a first class move.
Yeah, and even though I don't know if I'll be able to travel to Tampere, Finland in November, but the fact that he's sharing it online for tomorrow for the celebration on Wednesday, along with the fact that there will be games played in November, we'll get a little bit of a sense of the city. I know I'll be looking at YouTube videos, just researching all about his hometown too, and just the little things about that as well. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss more about whose seat is the hottest going into the 2024-25 season. One article revealed one player that we are not necessarily surprised with, but we're going to add on to that with our own personal list of whose seat is hottest. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals to save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for concerts, sports, comedy, theater, and more. It's flat. They also have flash deals where you could save more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And all-in pricing toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And it's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And once again, I'd like to thank you guys all for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Had to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Back here once again with Jacob Winans for another edition of Winans Wednesday here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And Jacob, so my colleague David Dwork wrote an article about the biggest hot seats going into the 2024-25 season. And this was actually an article he referenced to the national writers out for THN about picking each team and looking at the hottest seats throughout there. And obviously David Dwork is passing on that information, but obviously number one going into the season as far as the hottest seats, as far as players, to no one's surprise, it's Aaron Ekblad, with him being an expiring deal. We spoke about value of what he's getting for the contract versus production. Obviously a lot of credit to Aaron Ekblad for switching up his game since Paul Maurice has been there. It shows a lot about his maturity. So I want to give number one, start with that too. So he's not going to be the point producer like we saw prior to, or even the injury. So that makes the contract a little bit of a question mark going into that. But I want to take this opportunity to add on to whose seat could be the hottest here with the Florida Panthers. And we'll start with I have five players, and we'll go a little bit of a back and forth here. So number five, for me starts with Evan Rodrigues for me, and we're gonna go a little bit quickly here. So number 5 is Evan Rodrigues here for me. The Panthers have a lot of forwards, but won't have a lot of defensemen coming into the future. So for Evan Rodrigues, he's my number 5 player here on the Panthers as far as hottest seats going into 2024-25, and this could be some kind of cap clearing trade either at the deadline or even next offseason to maybe pay big money for a defenseman. Who's number 5 on your list?
Number 5 for me is actually someone who makes the same amount that Evan Rodrigues does, but it's actually Eetu Luostarinen. And he's at number 5 because he's not a guy that I expect to get moved at any point in the near future, but he does have that jump in his AAV that kicks in. And while he's a massive defensive asset and a really good middle six forward, the offensive production hasn't always been there. So if the Panthers get into a situation where cap becomes an issue, I could see him being a bit of an expendable piece if you can replace his defense, because he doesn't always provide that much offense. But that's not a knock on him at all. He knows his role. He gets paid what he should for it. But he's number 5 for me.
Number 4 for me is Carter Verhaeghe, pending free agent for him. Obviously, you have to make a decision between him and Sam Bennett. And likely, chances are, there could be a chance that the Panthers can't match his price tag based on him being a 40-goal scorer. And yes, there's the opportunity for him to take less. But when you have already 2 cups on your resume, you might want to go. Might want to go get the bag. So number 4 for Carter Verhaeghe, he is number 4 for me as far as hottest seats. I think he will stay for the rest of the season. He won't get dealt at all, but the Panthers might not be able to match his price.
Yeah, that's valid. Number 4 for me is actually Sam Bennett, for a lot of the same reasons that you just gave for Carter Verhaeghe. But I think paying Anton Lundell the money that they paid him, the plan is clearly for him to eventually become the 2C. Whether that's this year, next year, the year after, the plan is clearly for him to be the second line center. And that raises a lot of question marks about Sam Bennett and where he plays, because the price tag that he'll command is going to be higher than what a third line center would make. He's also better than what most third line centers are. He's had some injury issues. It's not him being injury prone. It's just a product of the way he plays. Incredibly aggressive and maximum effort player. So the injuries tend to add up where that's concerned. So there's some injury concerns. And then there's also the fact that you don't know how effective he would be in a 3C role when in his time as a Panther, he's played on lines with Jonathan Huberdeau, Matthew Tkachuk, always in a second line center role where the production comes a little bit easier playing with superstars on his wings. So number 4 for me is Sam Bennett. I just think his price tag might be a little high, even though his playoff production has been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Number 3 for me is Eetu Luostarinen, for all the reasons that you said. If they need to find a way to get some offensive value, even though for him, he's mostly a defensive piece. I mean, there were times that even in the season where the Panthers struggled to get some offense going, and it might be in a way to pay for a defenseman down the line if you need some of those dollars freed up, because we still don't know how far the cap is going to go up. So Eetu for me is number 3 for me. Who's number 3 for you?
Number 3 for me is in goal, and that's going to be Spencer Knight. I would guess that you'd probably have him higher up on your list. But for me, he's at that number 3 spot because it's really a make or break year for him. Given the salary, I don't think the Panthers can justify stashing him in the AHL again. He's gonna get a legitimate camp battle out of Chris Driedger. They're not just going to hand him the backup job, and Drieger's a proven NHL backup, at least pre-injury, and then just kind of ran into a crowded crease at times in Seattle. But keep in mind, Driedger took the Coachella Valley Firebirds to back-to-back Calder Cup finals. He's a guy who's really, really good at the AHL level, has proven to be really good at the NHL level. He'll get to play in front of a really good defense if he's on the Panthers roster at any point. So his numbers should look good, especially through preseason. He's going to give Spencer Knight a good camp battle. And I don't think at Spencer Knight's AAV you can justify stashing him in the minors any longer. So make or break year for number 30.
Yep. Spencer's number 2 on my list for that reason. And also because if you were to play Puckpedia GM, once again, you're gonna have the roster at 22. So chances are someone's going to be squeezed out in order to have Spencer Knight as part of the mix with the Florida Panthers too. So is that you got to wonder for the Panthers, how much are you going to put him in the crease with that situation for the Panthers going on, and what's going to happen, and going to have to navigate different situations, just kind of like how they did in 2023, where they rostered 20 players to start the season too. So there's a lot of pressure to perform and make it worth that you could have 22 players there. And also you're still looking at eyes right now and eyes to the future too for Spencer Knight. But number 1 for me, and this list excludes Aaron Ekblad, obviously, because this is the Aaron Ekblad one is the obvious one, but number 1 is Sam Bennett too for the Panthers, because like we said earlier, the Lundell contract signals that they're going to make him the 2C. They're going to make him the 2C in the future. So what's Sam Bennett going to do to afford a contract? Either is he going to take a roll back with being a 3C while the skill for Anton Lundell develops more? And the crazy thing, Paul Maurice also says about projection for Anton Lundell, he's like, I don't really know what it's going to turn into, but I'm really excited to find out. So that's the kind of the position that the Panthers are in between 2 and 3C. So number 1 is Sam Bennett for me.
Yeah. So with this list excluding Aaron Ekblad, my number 2, this is going to be a little bit off the board, not someone anyone's really talking about, but my number 2 is actually going to be Toby Bjornfoot. I think as a waiver claim, the Panthers are clearly intrigued with his skill set, but then they also bring in a couple of defensemen this offseason that are pretty solid locks to be on the roster. I think Bjornfoot's going to have a heck of a camp to avoid being sent down, which would require him to go through waivers again. And he could be picked up. I think he would likely be claimed by another team and have to start his career somewhere else again. He's played on a bunch of different teams recently, but the Panthers are a team that can really get the best out of him, I feel like, and develop him. He's got a lot of the same intangibles that Gus Forsling came here with. So he's an off the board pick, but he's my number 2 because he has a lot riding on his training camp. If he makes the roster, the Panthers could really invest in his development, but it's going to be a tall task. And then my number 1 is actually Evan Rodrigues. I was torn between Erod and Verhaeghe. I just feel like the Panthers are going to find the money to pay Carter Verhaeghe, and I think in order to do that, they're going to have to cut the forward payroll, and one of Etu and Evan Rodrigues is probably going to be on the way out the door. And I think when you look at it, Etu's younger, they make the same amount of money. Etu's more valuable defensively, and I think when you look at what the Panthers have in their prospect pipeline, Matthew Samoskevich has a better chance of replacing Evan Rodrigues' skill set than he does of replacing Etu's skill set. So I think when Mackey's ready, it's Erod's job that he would be taking, not Etu's. And I also think, given Evan Rodrigues' playoff production, his Stanley Cup final production, I think he would do better on the trade market than Etu would. So number 1 for me is Erod. I think depending on Mackey's development, this could be our last year of the Evan Rodrigues experience, which would be a shame, but he's definitely made his mark already.
Yeah, and 4 goals in the Stanley Cup final, the assist to Carter Verhaeghe on the go-ahead goal to start Game 7. Lots of memories, regardless of what happens after this year for Erod and everything. But we're gonna continue the conversation, and we spoke about hot seats. Now we're gonna talk about Mount Rushmores for the Panthers now. So we are going to discuss more of that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, July 31st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. And also, by the way, there's a few announcements for the Florida Panthers, though. There will be Panthers Day at the ballpark on September 6th, as the Panthers will be a few weeks away from training camp. Rookie camp will be coming up for them. The Miracle Latin Cup is coming this month in South Florida too. So a lot of more activities as far as the local hockey scene in South Florida too. Also, the Panthers Warriors will also be taking the ice on August 2nd, this Friday at 7:45. Lots of NHL alumni will be there too. So a lot of activities going on in the local hockey scene. But let's talk about the Florida Panthers Mount Rushmore. And man, was this a difficult topic even for me, names of me to put together. And as you can tell with the green screen background of all the presidents of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln right behind me, made for a opportunity to put our own Mount Rushmore together. And everyone has their own different criteria. That's the thing. There's no correct criteria, but the way I see it is impact on past, identity, and also accomplishment, personal and team accomplishments. And when you combine all that, it's really hard to do for me personally. So honorable mentions for me. A few: Scott Mellenby, obviously the rat trick wouldn't be a thing if it weren't for him. Bill Lindsay, that game-winning goal in round 1 against the Boston Bruins, still part of the organization. John Van Beesbrook, the first pick out of the expansion draft, and really took the Panthers on his back in '96. Matthew Tkachuk, part of an identity change for the Panthers when he was traded. Olli Jokinen, Aaron Ekblad, first overall pick for the Panthers, and Stephen Weiss. Those are my honorable mentions for the Panthers, but they're not on my Mount Rushmore, Jacob. So my Mount Rushmore, and a lot of the first 2 names are a lot of guys that Panther fans had when I tweeted this out. So my Mount Rushmore for me is Alexander Barkov, Roberto Luongo, Sergei Bobrovsky, and Pavel Bure. And here's my reasoning for my Mount Rushmore. Obviously, Barkov being the captain and winning the Stanley Cup with the Panthers, he's going to be with the Panthers at least a decade and a half by the time his contract ends. And Luongo, 2 stints with the Panthers, came back an emotional guy, a heart and soul, a guy who the Panthers fans attached to. Sergei Bobrovsky, personal accomplishments. He's a Hall of Famer. Definitely stamped that even before this year. Even last year's run stamped him into the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. And then winning a Stanley Cup with the Panthers and being the second guy. And then Pavel Bure, for me, carrying the Panthers to the playoffs in 2000. Obviously, they got swept in round 1, but you think about the records, the excitement, the amount of goals that were just exciting for, even though he was picked on for cherry picking and then going on breakaways and scoring on those too. That really brought a lot of excitement for Florida Panthers hockey, even though it wasn't an era of winning too. So for me, that is my Mount Rushmore of Florida Panthers. How about you, my friend?
Yeah, so I will also start with some honorable mentions here. So I'm gonna go with Beezer, Bobrovsky. Those are my honorable mentions in goal. Tons of forwards get an honorable mention here. Olli Jokinen, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart. I could continue. Pavel Bure is an honorable mention for me. He's actually not on my Mount Rushmore. He's in the honorable mentions. Stephen Weiss. Jaromir Jagr also gets an honorable mention for me because he was a huge culture changer. And we have him to credit a lot for what Barkov has turned into, showing him work ethic and training habits. And Barkov really became an animal under Jaromir Jagr's guidance. So he's an honorable mention for me. On defense, Brendan Montour, Aaron Ekblad, Ed Jovanovski. There's such a long list. But my Mount Rushmore, it's going to be Barkov, obviously. You can't even dispute this or argue it. It really requires no explanation. Barkov is number 1. Roberto Luongo, the only Panthers player to have his jersey retired, has meant so much to the franchise. He's number 2 on my Mount Rushmore. He's without a doubt up there. Matthew Tkachuk is on my Mount Rushmore already after just 2 seasons. 2 Stanley Cup final appearances. I was a Hart Trophy finalist, best player in the entire playoffs last year, leads the team in points this year. He's already in 2 years done more than most players have ever done. for the Florida Panthers. And my last one, this might surprise some people, but it's Jonathan Huberdeau.
Wow.
He makes it on my Mount Rushmore because if you look at the numbers, you don't really see anyone even close to Barkov's numbers outside of Jonathan Huberdeau. He's just behind Barkov in just about every statistical category offensively. He's just behind Barkov when it comes to games played. I mean, he gave everything to the Panthers the entire time he was here. The playoff success didn't always follow, but still holds the franchise record for most points ever in a season for a Florida Panther. He was spectacular. And I think you might have to fact check me on that. Actually, I don't know if Pavel Bure had more points. He had more goals, but I believe Huberdeau has the most points ever in a Panther season. But for me, he's on the Mount Rushmore. And one other reason I look at it this way is because if you look at Matthew Tkachuk and how he got here, the Panthers don't get Matthew Tkachuk without Jonathan Huberdeau being traded. And I do think that counts for an impact, because if Jonathan Huberdeau isn't as good as he was, Panthers never get Matthew Tkachuk. And I think that counts for something. So Huberdeau is on my Mount Rushmore as well.
Yeah, for Pavel Bure, the most points he had in the season was 94, and that was in 2000. So the one that he had 58. So
Correct.
Huberdeau had 115 in 2022. So
yeah, and Tkachuk got close, but he didn't get quite to 115. So that would leave Huberdeau as So Huberdeau
he had 109. Excuse me.
109. Yeah.
Yep. He had 104 the year before.
Correct. Yeah. 109.
Yep. So and back-to-back years of being a Hart Trophy candidate too. When you make that trade after, Huberdeau was fourth, but close enough to being in the top 5 for both of them when you traded them for each other too. And Barkov passed Huberdeau after the trade too. So also give you an idea of
right at the time. And that's what I was getting at, is at the time that Huberdeau was traded, he was first in these categories, points, assists, games played. So, and I think also just some credit is deserved there when it comes to being the draft pick that started the rebuild, 2011. He was really the pick that started this generation of Panthers hockey, and he was a mainstay through some really, really rough years, and was always the best player on some rough teams. So I think that also counts when you think about impact.
And then not coming to the team right away, and then winning the Calder Trophy in 2013, too, for him when him and Barkov were coming around at the same time, too. So that's another thing as far as that rebuild and for the Panthers, and just getting through with. You feel like Jonathan Huberdeau was making a play every single night during that President's Trophy winning season to when it was 3-on-3 hockey, that fast pace. It was fun to watch. Too, for sure, but definitely a big impact player, and for the longevity. I know that he really, really, truly wanted to retire Panther. That's the horrible part of the human side of this, but for the Panthers, it led them to the ultimate prize with that trade. So definitely unexpected for me hearing that list out of you, Jacob. But hey, that's why we talk about this, and it's opinion based, and there's no wrong answers here when we talk about our Mount Rushmores. And obviously things can change with a lot of guys still under contract who have many years left on there. So these are our Mount Rushmores as of right now. So we'll circle back to this conversation in upcoming years to see if our Mount Rushmore definitely changes. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much once again for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8. We'll be active there and right here every Wednesday.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week, my friend.
Can't wait. Thanks.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.